As you start to refine your prototypes, you'll reach a stage where you need to define an aesthetic. The visual aesthetic is going to add a whole new layer of meaning and depth to your game. This is one of your primary ways of communicating to the player. Finding your own style is up to you as the designer. I would tend to approach, discovering an art style, I think very much in the same way that I would approach, game concept research. Basically go out and look. There are a million, references out there, not just games, obviously, back in historical fine art or in whatever. You can just imagine all these different areas to grab visual inspiration from. We got a huge amount of material inspiration from those comic book covers from the 40s. And that was a really rich body of work, that had a very cohesive style and feel to it. Sometimes it'll be something that you find like that you kind of reference and say, we want to kind of feel like that. Other times it might be something kind of up and coming. It's funny how even, nowadays I see kids playing these retro games, or they play Minecraft, which is incredibly, basic visuals, but, like Lego, it has become a style to them. You go and look at these Lego movies, which are great, and it's amazing that they make these amazingly entertaining, very visually rich movies, out of a Lego world, rendered and of course animated, much more differently than you can do with real Legos, but yet as a style, it's delightful. So I think that there are a lot of things that may not obviously right off the bat feel like, oh, that's a good visual style. But if you think about certain things a little more deeply to the next level, how could that be a style? What would it look like? How would it animate? You might discover regions that are very unique. I kind of like the games that I work on to have almost a toy-like feel to them. Like bringing up a little bit more saturation on the colors, maybe things being a little bit more abstracted, feeling a little more, again, kind of model train-like. To me, that kind of makes it feel more playful and approachable. One of the things that I really enjoy looking at is things like tilt-shift photography, where they're actually taking pictures of the real world and now making it look like a model by changing the depth of field and, saturation and a few other things. It's funny how you can take one of those photos, the original photo, and it's of some downtown area, do tilt-shift version of it, and now it looks like something that I want to touch and grab and play with and manipulate. Instantly, I have this instinct to go in and start imagining things that I would want to do with it. In some sense, it's an invitation to agency. It's saying, this is a toy, this is a model, it's here for you to manipulate, play with, go at it, So I think in a subtle way, to me, by making it feel a little more toy-like or model-like, you're kind of getting the player into that mindset that this is something for you to interact with, not something for you to just sit back and look at. One of the things I did on Spore that I really enjoyed, and this is in the fairly early stages, is I went back and I was collecting, just downloading hundreds of these images that were appearing on the pulp comic books back in the 50s and 40s. And these are like science fiction stories or, whatever. And it was always like, some weird tentacled alien holding a blonde who's passed out and the spaceship in the background. The things in those images, not just the way they were rendered, but even just the items, there was usually some kind of alien, some kind of spacecraft, some alien planet, some muscle-clad astronaut. But I loved looking at just the style of those comic book covers. In fact, we printed them all out, put them all over the office. And it kind of became a guiding principle for the entire game. And it gave it a consistency and almost, I don't even think it would be nostalgic for any kid playing this. They probably didn't even see those covers. But yet there was almost a whimsy to it that it brought into the game at a very subtle level. The visual style within my games, initially it was on these 8-bit computers and, we were counting how many pixels we had, how many colors, and it was really severely limited. Over time, those limitations eased up more and more until at some point we were getting high-powered graphics card with pixel shaders and whatnot, in which case, we got to the point where we could achieve pretty high levels of realism, which I didn't really feel like I needed, but on the other hand, we were able to use these things in ways that were kind of unexpected. Like, for instance, in Spore, one of our programmers discovered that, I think it was Kate Compton, that she could use the pixel shaders in the graphics card to actually simulate turbulence on a gas giant. And she was getting like these beautiful turbulence patterns. And it's just very simple manipulations of the UV coordinates within the graphics card. So I think that those kind of opportunities, things that we never would have, if we had to just do that from scratch, calculate it all out, we never would have done it. But also, things more like getting the player more involved and more creative. So the fact that we could do procedural animation in Spore was really a result of the horsepower in the programming. And it reflected itself in the fact that, the graphics looked in this style, but the really important part was the player created it, And, at that point, it didn't even really matter so much what style it is. If the player created it, it's a whole different ballgame. And so I think I've been on the art side, kind of more in the direction of what can we do to have the player more responsible, more creative, more involved in these assets, in a way where it's natural and fun. Well, I've actually had the luck and privilege to work with really great art directors. And generally for me, it's more been a matter of their vision bringing really good alternatives to me, So I usually have 2 or 3 really good alternatives to choose from. And I don't feel like I can really take the responsibility for the quality of how that ended up, because I really think it was my art director that, had a lot more to do with it than I did. But in general, when confronted with alternatives, I would tend to say, okay, which one of these feels more playful to me? Which one of these feels like something I would want to go in and pick up and grab and manipulate? That's the way I would just kind of view it as a designer.
When we started working on the very early levels of the Spore, the very first level is microscopic, a little creature swimming around in a drop of water.
My art director I worked with for many years, Ocean Quigley, Ocean and I both, as kids, had microscopes. I still have a microscope. And we started thinking, okay, what would this look like under a microscope, under a slide? And Ocean would actually kind of prototype that. And there's this thing when you have the old microscopes that, as you move the focus lever just a little bit, things here were now going out of focus and things deeper were going into focus. You're actually manipulating the Z-plane where the focus was set. And so you were actually able to move in that third dimension, through a drop of water or whatever it was. And we both thought about that. And Ocean went back and found a way to render it such that he could take any of the planes and focus or defocus it at his whim, and we could have several of these in a row. So you could have, layers of this that were out of focus, but only one layer that was really in focus. That actually kind of brought up the idea that, okay, maybe as you're playing this cellular game that you're actually getting larger and larger, in which case you'd be moving from one plane to the next. So as your thing grew, we would now defocus the layer that you were on and bring into focus the layer that was above you, which were much bigger things that you just saw as fuzzy blobs before. But as soon as you grew to that size, they became in focus and now part of your game world. So you were only interacting with that layer that was in focus. So that was kind of a back and forth thing that Ocean and I did for a few weeks, kind of coming up with and then realizing that idea. But it became kind of very fundamental to the way that part of the game worked. Finding a good art director is probably going to be very similar to finding a good sound director. You want somebody who listens, first of all, and tries to understand, your vision. Somebody who can come up with ideas that you can't, maybe go off in creative areas that they are aware of because of their specific expertise, whether it be sound or art or whatever. Bring them back to you in a format, to where they offer you some choice. And I think that there's no, one size fits all. Sometimes, you'll want a very, very particular style as a designer, and you don't really want somebody giving you 5 other styles when you want that style, in which case you might, look for somebody who specializes in that. But other times, you might be a little more open to, should it be more like this or more like that? Should it be more Twilight, more realistic? Should it be darker? Should it be more humorous? I think that if you can speak in that kind of a language, to anybody on your team, no matter what they're doing, that I really think we want to go for humor and whimsy here, or I want dark and gothic here. If they can now interpret that and come back to you with really good alternatives that feel right to you, I mean, that's how you know you've got a good one. You know, if you're telling them you want to go in this style, but they keep pushing you to Disney, uh, then they've kind of got their own agenda, or they've got their own dogma. It also depends on the size of your team. You know, if it's a very small team, your art director is also going to be one of your artists, maybe your only artist. If you're on a big team, the art director is really going to be more managing a team of artists, and so your art director will have the opportunity to find the right artist to match that style for you. Really, you want somebody that's going to mesh with you in particular. I think that somebody who might be a great art director for me might be a really bad choice for somebody else. So, first and foremost, you have to have really kind of enjoy collaborating with them. And I think that's true of, most of your team, that these are going to be people you're going to be working alongside of for a long time. You're going to be putting a lot of time and passion and effort into this. And if you don't actually really enjoy being around these people and enjoy working with them, it's going to be work. But if you really enjoy the process of being with these people and collaborating and creating something with them, it's going to be something that you do for free.